There's a reason people feel uneasy around a sigma male who's been single for a long time. It isn't loneliness, it isn't bitterness. It's what developed in the silence. And most people are not prepared for what that silence creates. Society assumes that prolonged singleness weakens a man over time, that absence of intimacy leads to desperation, emotional decay, or quiet resentment. But that belief only applies to men who rely on external validation to stabilize their sense of worth. A sigma male operates under a different internal structure entirely. When a sigma male remains single, not because he was rejected, but because he chose solitude, something subtle yet profound begins to happen beneath the surface. The noise of social expectation fades. Emotional dependencies slowly dissolve. The constant need to be understood, affirmed, or desired collapses without drama. What replaces it is not emptiness, but clarity. The longer a sigma male stays single, the fewer emotional compromises he makes. He no longer edits his personality to remain attractive. He no longer negotiates his identity to preserve connection. Without even trying, he begins to observe people rather than absorb them. Patterns of behavior become obvious. Motivations become transparent. Emotional manipulation loses its leverage because it has nothing to attach to. This is where discomfort begins for others. Because when a man no longer needs connection to feel whole, he stops being predictable. Mental danger does not mean violence or hostility. It means independence of thought. It means emotional immunity. It means the inability to be steered through approval, affection, guilt, or rejection. A sigma male who has spent years alone learns to regulate his inner state internally instead of outsourcing that responsibility to relationships. While others lean on partners to stabilize their moods, decisions, and self-image, he becomes self-contained. And self-contained individuals are difficult to influence. Over time, the sigma male's mind sharpens. His decisions grow colder, not cruel, but precise. He evaluates outcomes instead of emotional reactions. He listens more than he speaks, not out of shyness, but discernment. He no longer reacts immediately because solitude taught him the power of delay. Silence becomes his default state, not as a tactic, but as a natural expression of control. This is why prolonged singleness changes him. He stops chasing reassurance. He stops fearing abandonment. He stops explaining himself. And when a man reaches that point, people sense it instinctively. They may not understand it consciously, but they feel it. A man who does not seek emotional permission moves differently and cannot be rushed, guilted, or pressured. And that is what makes him mentally dangerous, not to individuals, but to systems built on emotional leverage. Once a sigma male experiences this level of internal control, he rarely goes back. Point one, emotional autonomy becomes non-negotiable. When a sigma male remains single for an extended period, something subtle yet irreversible begins to reshape his internal structure, not in a dramatic or visible way, but quietly, through repetition and necessity. At first, the absence of romantic connection feels neutral, even freeing, because there is no immediate loss being registered. But as time stretches on, the lack of emotional outsourcing initiates a recalibration. There is no partner to absorb stress at the end of the day, no shared emotional space where frustration can be diluted, and no romantic reassurance to stabilize uncertainty. What replaces these outlets is not emotional numbness, but emotional accountability. Every feeling must be handled internally. Anxiety is no longer projected outward for comfort. Frustration is no longer softened by presence. Desire is no longer regulated by access. Instead, the Sigma male develops the habit of observing his emotional states without immediately reacting to them. This repeated self-observation trains emotional autonomy, which is often mistaken for detachment, but is fundamentally different from suppression. Suppression denies emotion. Autonomy processes it fully and then chooses a response. Over time, this selective responsiveness alters his psychological posture. He no longer reacts automatically to emotional triggers because nothing external is required to stabilize him. His nervous system adapts to self-containment. This is where the shift becomes threatening to systems built on emotional leverage. Guilt loses its urgency. Affection withdrawal loses its power. Emotional distance no longer signals danger. The Sigma male does not chase equilibrium through others because equilibrium has become an internal process. People may label this state as coldness, but that interpretation comes from those who rely on emotional exchange to regulate themselves. In reality, this is emotional self-sufficiency refined through solitude. Once established, it changes how he perceives relationships altogether. Dependency begins to feel inefficient. Emotional volatility feels unnecessary. Reactive bonding feels unstable. He does not reject connection, but he no longer needs it to function. This is why the transformation is irreversible. Returning to emotional dependency would require unlearning self-regulation, surrendering internal stability, and reintroducing volatility into a system that has learned precision. The Sigma male does not fear intimacy. He simply refuses to rely on it for psychological balance. And once this internal architecture is formed, it becomes non-negotiable, not because of pride, but because it works. Point 2, cognitive focus replaces romantic preoccupation. Romantic involvement consumes a remarkable amount of cognitive energy, not because love itself is a weakness, but because sustained emotional coordination requires constant attention. Planning, anticipating reactions, managing tone, maintaining emotional harmony, navigating expectations, and correcting misunderstandings all draw from the same limited reservoir of mental bandwidth. Even in healthy relationships, the mind is frequently pulled outward, checking, adjusting, and responding. When a Sigma male remains single, this cognitive demand does not vanish. Instead, it reallocates. At first, the mind may wander unused to the absence of emotional obligations. There may be periods of restlessness, reflection, or internal noise. But over time, something quieter and more powerful emerges. The absence of romantic preoccupation creates prolonged mental stillness. In this stillness, focus deepens naturally rather than forcefully. The Sigma male begins to think in longer time horizons. His attention shifts away from short-term validation and towards systems, skills, knowledge accumulation, and personal structure. He becomes less interested in moment-to-moment stimulation and more invested in trajectory, where actions lead, how patterns compound, and what outcomes look like years rather than weeks ahead. This cognitive reorientation sharpens perception. He notices inefficiencies in routines, conversations, workplaces, and social dynamics. He becomes sensitive to wasted motion, unnecessary emotion, and circular behavior, both in himself and in others. Because his mind is no longer fragmented by emotional maintenance, he can sustain deep concentration for extended periods without fatigue. This capacity for uninterrupted thought makes him mentally dangerous in environments where others are distracted, reactive, or emotionally scattered. While others chase stimulation or reassurance, he studies structure. While others speak to be seen, he listens to understand leverage. He does not rush decisions, because urgency is rarely rewarded. He does not seek immediate payoff, because he understands delayed returns. He observes quietly, while others reveal their priorities through impatience, insecurity, and impulsive action. Over time, this produces a man who appears calm, even unremarkable on the surface, yet is mentally operating several layers deeper than those around him. His silence is not emptiness, but compression. His stillness is not passivity, but stored momentum. In a world optimized for distraction, this depth becomes a decisive advantage. Point 3, pattern recognition improves without emotional bias. One of the least discussed consequences of prolonged singleness is the gradual removal of emotional bias from perception, a process that reshapes how the mind interprets people, situations, and intent. Romantic attachment, by its very nature, bends reality. It introduces hope where evidence is thin, projection where information is incomplete, rationalization where behavior is inconsistent, and selective blindness where truth would be inconvenient. These distortions are not signs of weakness. They are human survival mechanisms designed to preserve attachment. But when a Sigma male remains single for an extended period, those mechanisms lose their function. With no emotional dependency to protect, the mind no longer needs to soften reality. Perception sharpens. He begins to see people as they are rather than as he wishes them to be. Patterns that once blended into background noise become distinct. Repeated behaviors reveal character. Small contradictions accumulate meaning. Motivations surface without being announced. Over time, this clarity evolves into an intuitive grasp of social dynamics, not because he seeks control, but because his awareness is no longer filtered through emotional need. This is where his mental danger quietly forms. He cannot be easily deceived because deception depends on emotional investment. Flattery fails when approval is not required. Promises lose power when attachment is absent. He notices tension before it reaches the surface because he is observing rather than participating. He hears what is not said. He registers the space between words and actions. Most people rely on emotional engagement to blur accountability, to create plausible deniability, and to soften consequences. The Sigma male's detachment removes that blur entirely. He does not rush to confront because confrontation is reactive and often inefficient. Instead, he watches. He lets people reveal themselves through consistency or the lack of it. Observation, sustained over time, becomes a form of quiet psychological leverage. Not leverage used aggressively, but leverage that ensures he is never caught off guard. He knows when to step back, when to disengage, and when silence is more effective than a response. His power lies not in dominance, but in clarity. And clarity, when paired with patience, is what makes him mentally dangerous, not loud, not obvious, but profoundly difficult to manipulate or mislead. Point 4, detachment strengthens decision-making. Extended singleness reinforces decisiveness through necessity, not ideology. When a man lives without a partner to consult, accommodate, or reassure, decision-making stops being a shared emotional process and becomes an internal discipline. In the beginning, this absence can feel uncomfortable, even disorienting. There is no immediate feedback loop, no emotional mirror to validate direction. But over time, repetition replaces doubt with clarity. Each choice made alone strengthens the internal compass. The Sigma male learns to sit with uncertainty without outsourcing it. He considers consequences privately, tests ideas internally, and commits only when alignment is felt, not when permission is granted. This gradually removes hesitation. Decisions become cleaner because fewer emotional variables are introduced. He is no longer balancing moods, expectations, or relational negotiations. Instead, he measures outcomes against principle, long-term trajectory, and personal standards. This does not make him reckless. On the contrary, it makes him deliberate, in a quieter, more efficient way. By the time action is required, the internal debate has already been resolved. Detachment in this context is often misunderstood. It does not mean emotional coldness or a lack of empathy. It means freedom from emotional interference at the point of execution. Feelings are acknowledged earlier in the process, then set aside when clarity has been reached. In social and professional environments, this is deeply unsettling to many people. Modern interaction often relies on emotional negotiation, subtle cues, reassurance, and consensus building. People expect hesitation, explanation, or visible doubt before movement occurs. The Sigma male offers none of these signals. His clarity removes leverage. There is no opening for persuasion through guilt, flattery, or pressure because the decision is already internally sealed. He does not seek approval after the fact, nor does he over-explain his reasoning. This absence of performative justification makes others label him unpredictable or even intimidating. In reality, he is remarkably consistent. His actions follow internal alignment rather than external reinforcement. What confuses others is not randomness, but the lack of emotional breadcrumbs they are used to following. Extended singleness sharpens this trait further, without relational compromise softening his edges. Decisiveness becomes instinctual. He moves when it is time to move and remains still when it is not. To observers accustomed to emotional signaling, this feels dangerous. To the Sigma male, it feels natural. He is not reacting to the world, he is responding to himself. Point 5, validation becomes internally generated. As the Sigma male remains single, something subtle but irreversible begins to take shape beneath the surface of his psychology. The constant human need for validation, once reinforced through romantic attention, admiration, or social mirroring, starts to weaken and eventually dissolve. Without the steady feedback loop of romantic affirmation, external reinforcement loses its urgency. Compliments no longer function as fuel. They register as neutral information. Praise is observed, not absorbed. Criticism, once capable of triggering emotional correction or self-doubt, is processed as raw data rather than perceived as a threat. This shift marks a profound internal reorganization. Validation is no longer outsourced, it is generated internally, governed by standards that are private, precise, and non-negotiable. This internalization of validation is one of the most destabilizing traits to external systems, because systems depend on leverage. A man who does not require approval cannot be easily steered, rewarded, or punished. He does not chase recognition because recognition no longer defines movement. He does not fear disapproval because disapproval no longer carries consequence. His behavior is no longer reactive. It is self-referential. He moves according to internal criteria that others cannot access, audit, or manipulate. Over time, this creates a quiet but unmistakable psychological boundary. It is not aggressive and it is not performative. It simply exists. People sense it instinctively, even if they cannot articulate why interactions feel different. Conversations around him subtly recalibrate. Attempts at social pressure lose traction. Emotional bargaining fails to land. Expectations dissolve on contact. The Sigma male is no longer negotiating his identity with the world. He is executing it in real time. His presence no longer asks for permission, nor does it invite correction. This internal validation system solidifies into a permanent structure, shaping decision-making, emotional regulation, and self-perception with increasing efficiency. Once established, it rarely reverses, because returning to external approval would require the Sigma male to abandon a system that has already proven more stable, more honest, and more powerful than anything society offered him before. Point 6. Presence replaces performance. The final transformation occurs when the Sigma male stops performing altogether, and this shift is subtle but absolute. He no longer signals value because he no longer needs value to be recognized. He no longer advertises confidence because confidence has moved inward, becoming structural rather than expressive. He no longer explains his direction because his life no longer requires validation or witnesses. His presence becomes sufficient on its own, grounded and immovable. This is not dominance, not control, not intimidation. It is solidity, the kind that cannot be shaken because it is not built on reaction. He speaks less now, not out of fear or disinterest, but because words are no longer tools for persuasion. When he does speak, it carries weight because it is measured, intentional, and free of emotional excess. He reacts slowly, but when action comes, it is decisive and final. His calm is not passive or detached, it is controlled, disciplined, and alert. There is awareness behind it. People around him may feel unsettled in his presence, not because he threatens them, but because he does not seek them, he does not pull, chase, or lean. This absence of need disrupts familiar social dynamics. It is often misinterpreted as arrogance, coldness, or emotional distance, when in truth it is completion. The Sigma male has integrated solitude into his identity so fully that it no longer feels like isolation. Singleness has not weakened him or deprived him of connection. It has compressed him. Like pressure refining carbon into diamond, time alone has condensed his thoughts, sharpened his emotional control, and clarified his internal hierarchy. Mentally, emotionally, and psychologically, he has become self-contained. He no longer leaks energy through over-explaining, over-giving, or over-reacting. His sense of self is no longer negotiated in social spaces. This is what makes him mentally dangerous, not to individuals, but to systems that rely on dependency, distraction, and emotional leverage. He cannot be easily manipulated because he is not emotionally hungry. He cannot be easily distracted because his attention is internally governed. He cannot be easily controlled because his worth does not fluctuate with approval or rejection. In a world designed to fragment focus and manufacture need, the Sigma male's integrated calm becomes a quiet form of resistance. He does not rebel loudly, he simply opts out. And that quiet refusal is what truly unsettles the structures around him. The Sigma male does not become mentally dangerous by rejecting connection. He becomes dangerous by mastering himself before allowing it. And mastery, when silent and complete, is often invisible until it is unmovable.